So welcome everyone. As you know, every year we have a department retreat, and it's a great event. Unfortunately, not many of the faculty members come. I don't know why. It's a really nice opportunity to learn about physics. The students explain their work very slowly and very well. And this year, Eric's group presented 3 excellent talks, and he won the Best Group Award from the retreat. And the prize is a colloquium of the group leader. So today will give us a colloquium on one of the works that were not presented in the retreat because we couldn't give him 4 places. And the talk is you can see the title, but hopefully there will be a little bit of ephemerophysics somewhere in the middle because this is what I was very curious about. So Eric, please.
So thank you very much. So first time that I hear that an award is a punishment for the students who gave such good talks. They have to come here, not only to hear this for the first time, but for the second or third time, because they were, rehearsals. Okay, anyway, this is your definition of the award. Very good. Anyway, I wanted to thank you for giving me this important opportunity to present this work. Because to tell you the truth, I enjoyed very much preparing the talk. So it's not a necessary condition. It is a necessary condition, but not sufficient for you to enjoy listening to it. But I really enjoyed preparing it. So you will tell me. The last thing is that you said last time that there will be a series of talk on gravitational waves. So I'm not part of this series. It should be clear. About Efimov, don't worry. Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. This is the title of the talk. I didn't know, but there is something important. Here is observation. And observation means an experiment. So there will be quite a lot of experimental results that I will discuss. So this is the program of today's talk. There are mostly 4 parts. One about some geometric considerations, and then I will discuss simple quantum mechanics about this 1/r squared potential, and some renormalization group ideas. Then I will discuss some story about Dirac and Coulomb. Do we know everything? Don't worry, there is nothing that is beyond. Okay, and an experimental surprise, and then the 2 by ephemerophysics. So let me see ephemerophysics here. There is an advantage of this is that those 4 parts are almost completely independent, which means that if you fall asleep during one of them, then not everything is lost. You can just wake up for the next one and follow and even enjoy it, okay, without losing it. Before starting, I would like to say that all this work and the works that were presented at the retreat and the previous talks is a result of collective work in a very, very nice group of students at the Technion. People that, so mostly Dor, Eli, Ariane, Po, Omri, Oran, Tal, Alex, who is not here anymore, also left. Evgeny is now also left. People at Rafael, Ehud Pazi at NRCN, and people abroad also. So all this is really a collective effort of this group over the last few years. But most precisely what I'm going to tell you today is to put to the credit of Omri, who is sitting somewhere here, there, and all the theoretical work and the analysis of the experiment is what he did. And the experiments were done in the group of Eva and Ray at Rutgers, and were done by Gene Heimer. Okay, so first part, how to determine the spatial dimension of a given manifold. So suppose that you take a homogeneous string like this, and it has a uniform mass per unit length, and I ask you what is the behavior of the mass as a function of length. And then you will tell me that you expect the mass to be proportional to the length. Right? And if I do it in a lattice like this, with the same, made out of the same homogeneous strings, then you will expect that the mass will go like L squared. And if we do it in d dimensions, then you will expect to have this. Okay? Strong commitment. And I will call those things, just to give names, Euclidean lattices. More than this. And how to obtain this result? So to obtain this result, one way is just, for instance, to put together two such strings of length L. And then you will agree with me that the mass of this 2L string is twice the mass of length L. And in fact, I could cut this the way I wish. And more generally, I have to solve this kind of relation where A and B are whatever I want. I mean, once A, I fix it, then B is a function of A, and I have to solve this relation. Now, this is called the scaling relation. It's a relation that relates this function, in that case, the mass at Ax. It's related to the function of x plus times another term. And if this relation is satisfied for all A and B that depends on A, then the system is said to have continuous scaling variance, CSI. Okay, continuous scaling variance. Okay, and the solution of this equation by just direct inspection is a power law. It's just a constant time, a power law alpha x to the power alpha, where alpha is related to this A and B of A by this. Okay, so you just can apply this to the previous examples, and you will get 1, 2, D as expected. And power laws like this are signature of scaling variance of the system.
D
Okay?
is linearly arranged? Otherwise, alpha would depend on A.
No, B and A, they depend on each other. Okay, so in the previous case it was 2 and 2. So it's log 2 divided by log 2, it's 1. Another one was log 4 divided by log 2, which is 2, etc. Yeah. Now, I want to consider lattices, structures which are not Euclidean lattices, just as I defined before, but something that I will call iterative lattice structures, which goes with named fractals also. And this is the same kind of iterative structure as we saw before, but a little bit different. So for instance, this one is known as a Sierpinski cascade, and you can build it that way. Another example is what is called the diamond lattice. So this is one diamond lattice, another one, but you can iterate and you get this nice figure, this nice lattice. Another one is called the triadic Cantor set. Okay? And those fractals are self-similar objects. What does it mean? It means that if you take this Sierpinski cascade and you cleverly enlarge the right portion, then you get exactly the same. And if you do it ad infinitum, then you will get again and again the same. And such fractal objects are said to have discrete scaling symmetry. Okay? Not continuous, discrete. And what I claim is that those fractal lattices are not so different from the Euclidean lattices that we saw before. And to show this, I would like first to define fractal dimension in a more quantitative way. So you could ask the same question: what is the dependence of the mass with the scale of the system? Okay, the same question as well before. So here each bond has a mass, and this is the length L, this is 2L, this is 4L. And then at each step of the iteration, the fractal graph is characterized by its total length, which is 2 to the n times the initial one. So here it was again 1, here it's 2n, it's 4n, etc. And the mass is the number of bonds. So here it was 3, here it's 9, and etc. And the so-called Hausdorff geometric dimension of this object is obtained by looking at the ratio how this mass grows with the length, and in the limit of the infinite number of iterations, this goes to a number, and this number is equal to this. Okay, just from this equation. And this is smaller than 2, which means that this graph, which is embedded in the two-dimensional plane, in fact has a dimensionality that is smaller than 2, which is the dimension of the plane. Okay? Now, you could do the same for the Cantor set, which is, this is the rule of how the mass changes and how the length changes. And this is smaller than 1, although this Cantor set is defined on the line. Okay, alternatively, we can define the mass density of the Cantor set by this relation. So it's the same, it's equivalent to this one. And you have just to solve this in order to get our n depends on n. Now, if you compare, this is what we have for this Cantor set, for instance, and this is what we have for the Euclidean lattice. And you see that, in fact, it looks almost the same. So here it's 2, 2, here it's 3, 2, but there is a big difference. Is that in the case of the Cantor set, here, those numbers, 2 and 3, are fixed. You cannot change them. They are not whatever you want. Okay? And if a system obeys this kind of scaling law with fixed A and B, it is said to have a discrete scale invariance, not a continuous scale invariance. And this is a weaker version of this scale invariance. This is the same scaling equation, but with fixed A and B now. Okay? And if you compare the two, so this is the equation that you want to solve. If you solve it for any B and A that depends on the problem B, then the general solution is this power law, with alpha is equal to log B divided by log A. And if you solve this equation with fixed A and B, which means for discrete scale invariance, then the general solution is also a power law like this, with the same exponent. But now it's times a function, which is a periodic function of period 1, and this function depends on log x divided by log A. Okay, so it's the difference between continuous scale invariance and discrete scale invariance. Okay, they are the same equation, but one is with fixed coefficient, and the other one is not. So now the question is it possible to break this continuous scale invariance into a discrete scale invariance? So if you followed me here, the answer will be no, because your system is either the Euclidean system or fractal system. Either it is fixed or it is not fixed. You cannot just play with this and say I can break this continuous scale invariance at will. Now, all the aim of the talk is to show you that in fact it's possible to break this continuous scale invariance into discrete scale invariance, but at the quantum level. And this transition is a quantum phase transition. And this is also called, I mean, it's not called, it goes together with something else that is called a scale anomaly, quantum mechanics. Okay? So this is the claim of the talk now, that I will show you how quantum mechanically it's possible to have this breaking. Okay. Chapter 2. Now, independent, something else, completely different. So if you missed the opportunity to ask a question about part 1, then you missed it. Yossi.
Can I ask about the previous slide? So the general solution, you wrote the functional equation. The general solution was written on the right-hand side, not on the left-hand side.
No, this is for the fixed A and B. This is the general solution. And this is for any A, the general solution. Which means that, okay? So this is now, A and B here are just frozen. You cannot change them. There are 3 and 2 a given. This is a fractal. And this one is just the Euclidean lattice. A and B, you can choose them at will. You can divide your string into 2, 2, or 1/4 and 3/4. Okay? So there are two different things. They are close, but this is a weaker version of this. And when you see this log periodic guy, then you know that you have discrete scale invariance. It's a way to say that you have discrete scale invariance. Okay. So a simple example of continuous scale invariance in quantum physics. So let's look at Schrödinger equation for a particle of mass mu in a d-dimensional space in this attractive potential. Okay, so this is a problem that we give to students in quantum mechanics 1 most of the time, and they enjoy it very much. And why they enjoy it very much? For the following reason. So this is the Hamiltonian, and you see that, so this Hamiltonian is nice, but you already see something is that Laplacian is something that goes like 1 over length squared, and this potential goes like 1 over length squared also. Which means that if you write it in proper scaling out way, you can write, for instance, the radial Schrödinger equation in d dimensions under this way, under this form, where now this zeta is just a dimensionless combination of the mass, of the parameter psi, of the orbital angular momentum, and the dimension d of the space. Okay, so this is the radial Schrödinger equation. And this equation involves only one parameter, zeta, and this parameter is dimensionless, because you see that this term is wave function divided by length squared, wave function divided by length squared, wave function divided by length squared, relative and r, and wave function divided by length squared. So zeta is dimensionless. So this is extremely different from, for instance, the Coulomb potential, which is 1 over r, and for which, because it is 1 over r, then there is an obvious length or energy scale that goes into the problem, which is the Bohr radius or the corresponding energy. Okay? So in this problem, there is no length scale, and there is no energy scale, no significance. Okay, so what is the consequence? The consequence is that this Schrödinger equation displays continuous scale invariance. Namely, it is invariant under this transformation. If you change r into lambda r and k into 1 over lambda k for any lambda, okay, not fixed lambda, for any lambda, then the Schrödinger equation remains invariant. And this means that to every normalizable wave function psi over r and k corresponds a family of wave functions which are psi of lambda r and k over lambda of energy lambda k squared. And the problem with this is that if you succeed to find one such bound state, this implies that there is a continuum of such bound states. And this is a problem, because this means that there is no ground state in this problem. Okay? And this should be a problem to us. Okay? This is why we ask this problem to students, because it's interesting. And so it's a problem, but it's a well-known one. It's in the textbooks. And it results essentially from the ill-defined behavior of the potential for r goes to 0 and the absence of characteristic lengths. Technically, and I will not enter into this, the point is that the corresponding Hamiltonian is not emission. And in order to cure it, in order to define a proper emission operator, Hamiltonian, we need to define boundary conditions somewhere for some values of r. Okay? Good? And so I will give you only the outline, the result of all those calculations, not to do the technicality of Hermitian, self-adjointness, and things like this. But the point is the following. This Hamiltonian is scale invariant, continuous scale invariant, and the point is that any type of boundary condition that is needed to find well-defined Hermitian Hamiltonian will break continuous scale invariant that is here. Okay? And it will break it into discrete scale invariance. This is the point. Okay? So this is what I want to convey. So far so good? Yes? Okay. So let's just represent this outline of the main result with some pictures, because Meet asked me to show pictures. So this is our potential. This potential is is not really well defined here. This is where is the source of our problem. And then, in order to solve this problem, to somehow solve it, I will introduce a short-range regularization, which means that I introduce a given length, L0 here, and below this L0, I just define another potential that I call V small, which accounts for real short-range physics. Now, the exact expression of this potential is absolutely irrelevant for what I want to say. So it can be this one, it can be that one, it can be your favorite one. I don't really care too much about this potential, but it exists. Okay? And now the problem is well defined because I have a characteristic length, L0, and I can impose boundary conditions here, which is continuity of the wave function of the derivative of the wave function, by this kind, what is called mixed boundary conditions, which involves a new parameter that I call G, which depends on L0. And by having those things, you can just deduce from it an energy spectrum. So then you have a solution to your problem, you are happy. Hermitian Hamiltonian, but it's not the initial problem. Okay? So now, how the energy spectrum looks like. So I don't want to look at all the energy spectrum because there is some part that is completely not universal, that depends on the choice of this regularizing potential. But what I claim is the following, is that at low enough energies, which means for energies close to zero, the spectrum, this spectrum has a universal behavior that is absolutely independent of the way I regularize it. And this universal spectrum depends on the parameter zeta that we defined before, okay? And it exists also a singular value of this parameter, which is given by this expression. It depends only on the dimension of space, okay? Such that if zeta is smaller than this zeta critical, then close to zero energy, there is only a single bound state. And this single bound state behaves like this. It behaves like 1 over this length squared times a given function of G. This is for zeta smaller than this zeta critical. And for zeta larger than zeta critical, the spectrum close to zero energy behaves like this. It is a kind of ladder, which is given by this beautiful expression. It's e to the power minus pi n, and is an integer, divided by square root of zeta minus zeta critical. This I will call universal, because it's universal, Efimov spectrum. Now Efimov is just to please Amit. It's just a name. It has nothing to do with Efimov. Okay? Just to please you, for you. Okay? So this is the typical behavior of the spectrum. Now, in addition to this, there is a non-universal part of this spectrum, which I don't care about. This depends on V of R, this depends on many things. I'm interested only what is close to zero here. So it is either a single bound state like this, or universal Efimov spectrum. And now, when I take the limit that L0 goes to infinity with fixed E L0 squared, then I have a phase transition between those two cases, which means that this state now, when L0 goes to infinity, this state goes to zero, and this is the Efimov, the universal Efimov spectrum. And at this value of this parameter zeta, you have a phase transition between one bound state here, and which opens into a ladder of Efimov states. Okay? And this is universal. This does not depend, this depends only on what is written here. That's what I want to.
Is this similar to optical fibers, which has single mode or multi-mode situation?
I know nothing about optical fibers. I don't know. I would love to.
It depends on the form of the
Okay, so this is another example. So you'll teach me this stage. Very good.
How is it related to the hydrogen?
It's not related. It's 1 over R squared.
It's one of those.
Will you discuss the
critical case.
Yes. Okay, so so this is the idea. Now, here, this spectrum has continuous scale invariance, but a trivial one, because there is one state at 0, and 0 times lambda for any lambda is also equal to 0, so this is continuous scale invariance for any lambda. And this spectrum has discrete scale invariance. This spectrum is discrete scale invariance. Why? Because if you take one of those energies, you multiply by this fixed lambda, which is defined, you get, in fact, En plus 1 for any n, and this is the same spectrum. So this spectrum is discrete scale invariant, and this one is continuous scale invariant. And at this value of the parameter zeta critical, you have a transition. Something happens that we will discuss later. Okay, so this is so far so good. Yes. So let me just summarize what I said about this universal ephemeral energy spectrum. This is the spectrum. It is just this lambda time to the power n. Now this energy is non-universal. This depends on the regularization of this. What is universal is this part. The ephemeral spectrum is invariant under discrete scaling transformation, this we know. And if we now calculate the density of states, which is defined by this, you can just notice that the density of state obeys the following scaling relation. If you take a rho of E times lambda squared, where lambda is this fixed parameter, it is equal to 1 over lambda squared times rho of E. And this is just a scaling relation of the type that we saw earlier in the talk. And the solution of this equation is 1 over E times the periodic function of period 1 of log E divided by log lambda, where lambda is fixed. Okay? Lambda is fixed. So this is exactly the same as the example that we had here. Okay? So this spectrum is fractal, if you prefer. This is a fractal spectrum. Ephemeral spectrum. Okay? Fractal. Ephemeral is fractal. Okay, now I would like to look at the same problem from another point of view. Different, but equivalent. I want to use the renormalization group language in order to describe this. Why? Because it provides another point of view which perhaps is more physical to this 1 over R squared problem. It inserts that problem in a broader perspective, and it connects it with other physical properties. So, as we saw, the problem came from the fact that this potential is ill-behaved for R goes to 0, and there is no characteristic length. This is what we saw. Okay, that it's possible to regularize all this with defining an L and blah, blah, blah. And then we get an energy spectrum. Okay.
Sorry, Eric. I'm a little confused about the statement about the need for renormalizing the singularity that you have with R equals 0. I mean, that singularity that you have regardless of the...
I don't hear you. I hear nothing.
Okay, so there's the issue of scale invariance.
Yes.
And there's the issue of the singularity as R goes to 0. And I don't see the connection between them. I mean, the Coulomb potential has the same singularity.
No, but it has, the Coulomb potential has a characteristic length.
Of course, right. That's because in both cases there is a mass scale present, which is the mass of the electron. So I don't see the connection between the scale invariance or lack of it and the need to regularize.
The need to
regularize. I mean,
it's because the Hamiltonian is not Hermitian. They have to do something.
Well, you have the same problem in for the electron, in the 1 over R potential.
No.
Okay. I mean, you can ask the question of what happens as R goes to 0, and we know we'll solve that. But
no, but again, this is the fact that it is scale invariant. There is absolutely no length and no energy scale. This is what is also very important here. And this does not exist for the Coulomb potential. I mean, so I will discuss the Coulomb potential later, okay? Just to please you.
I think there is a physical scale present, which is the mass of the electron in either case. But that
No. Oh, okay. Okay. But I will discuss the Coulomb potential to please you. Okay, so here it's just again the same problem as we had before. And the question is it possible to change consistently L, this L, Xi, this Xi, and G that sets the boundary conditions here, such that the energy spectrum remains the same. Okay? So, first of all, the first thing that I will do, just allow me to do this, because psi is a dimensionless number, I will change, and it does not change with L, I will just for a while replace 1 over R squared by 1 over Rs, and eventually take S goes to 2, not to 1, to 2. Okay? So now, if I do this, now psi depends on L, G depends on L, and I want to change L. So now I want to do what is called the renormalization group transformation, which means that I want to change this cutoff here, this L, into L plus dL, and I want to change this and this so that the energy spectrum remains of the same kind. That's what I discussed before. Okay? So there is a way to do this, and the way is that you have to change psi according to this way, and you have to change G according to this relation. If you change, when changing L, you change psi and G according to those relations, then, and this is for low enough energies, again in the universal part, for L goes to infinity, then the spectrum will remain unchanged. Okay, so you can do this calculation, you can show it. And those two equations are called renormalization group equations for this problem. Okay? Good. Now let's look at the first equation, the equation for the coupling. We define a beta function, which is just this derivative with respect to log L, which is what we had before. And if now you take back S equals to 2, which is our potential, then this is equal to 0, and therefore psi is scale independent, does not depend on L, because this derivative is 0. And therefore zeta is also scale independent, because it's just a combination of this and the mass and everything. Okay? And now the second equation, the equation for G of L, has this form, where zeta is just L independent. And this you can factorize under this form, and those are the two rules. And here you see our old friend zeta critical that shows up again. Okay? Now this expression is just an inverted parabola. And you see that in fact, depending on zeta as compared to zeta critical, this parabola is either like this with two real roots, or it has just one root at zeta equals zeta critical, or it has no real value solutions. Okay? Now what happens when zeta is smaller than zeta critical? So then there are two fixed points here, which mean 2 points at which beta is 0, right? Beta is this derivative. When G is equal to G plus or to G minus, this is 0. And this means that at those points, G are L independent. They do not depend on the size. So you can just change the size again and again, we get the same. Okay? And this point, G plus, is a stable point, and this is an unstable point. What does it mean? It means that if you start at some L somewhere along this curve, and then you increase L again and again and again, you will move always towards these stable fixed points, and always away from this unstable fixed point. You can do it yourself. Okay? And then eventually you will, in the L close to infinity limit, you will arrive to this fixed point. And at this point, you have the universal behavior of the energy spectrum. And what is this energy spectrum? It is the one we had before. For zeta smaller than zeta critical, this point just describes this single bound state. Okay? Now,
just to make sure I understand, when you send L to infinity, is L the point where you connect your potential to this?
yes.
When you send it to infinity, what exactly are you doing in terms of the potential?
It means that I'm looking at energies that are closer and closer to 0. If you remember where this state here, and when L goes to infinity, it means that we are going to be closer and closer to 0. And which is?
So it means you're gluing your regulator farther out.
Yes, further up, yes. Now, when zeta is larger than zeta critical, So here we have two complex valued solutions. Okay? There are no fixed points anymore. Those fixed points disappear. And what we have instead is what is called a limit cycle. There are no fixed points, limit cycle. And which means that the solution for G of L looks like this. So this is G of L as function of L. It has this cycle. Each time that you do this, you go again. And this cycle completes the period each time that you change L by this famous discrete lambda times L. And the spectrum that you obtain from this value of L is precisely the universal Efimov spectrum. Okay? And with the same lambda that is here. Now, therefore, this problem of breaking the continuous into discrete scaling invariants can be interpreted in terms of this renormalization group picture as having zeta. When you increase zeta, you start with two fixed points, and then when zeta increases, you arrive to this critical fixed point, and when zeta increases again, you get limit cycle solutions. The term limit cycles was introduced many years ago by Ken Wilson, 71. I will get something. Okay, so this is another way to look at the same problem. Okay? So now I finished with 1 over r squared potential, but in order to please, not to please you. Huh? Yeah, I did not finish. I promised you I will say something. But in order first to please Yael and Shmuel also, I will discuss Coulomb potential, 1 over r. So this is what we had. And an immediate question when you see, you remember that this potential is interesting, is juicy, because this you compare 1 over r squared to the Laplacian, which is 1 over length squared. Then you ask the question, what about the Dirac equation with a Coulomb potential? Why? Because the Dirac equation, in fact, is linear with the momentum. This is the Dirac equation. So it is the square root of the Laplacian, if you wish. And if now you put the Coulomb potential, then you have the same continuous scale invariance. Okay? Okay, but this is Dirac. This is not linear. So now, the basic question is, but don't we know everything about the Dirac hydrogen atom? We teach it, and if there would be all this balagan with this Dirac hydrogen atom, we'll know about this. We know, we never heard about this. We teach it in quantum mechanics 3, right? So, in fact, there is such a problem, and this is an old problem. This is well known. It has been first addressed by Pomeranchuk in 1945. And there is a problem exactly of the sort that we discussed. Now, let me just remind you a few facts about QED. The success of QED, quantum electrodynamics, lies in the fact that you can do perturbation theory with a small parameter. The small parameter is called the fine structure constant, which is this combination of fundamental constants. And this parameter is small. It's 1 over 137. Okay? It's dimensionless. And in fact, each time that you do calculation involving bound states of a nucleus of charge Z, E, in QED, it involves the dimensionless combination, which is not alpha, but which is Z alpha. Okay? And now, perturbation theory, which works because alpha is small, may fail if Z alpha is larger or equal to 1. And in that case, we have an instability of the vacuum of the ground state against situation of electron-positron pairs. So this is what Pomeranchuk discussed. Okay? Now, how to understand this instability? So let's do a simple heuristic calculation of what is called the Dirac-Kepler problem. Let's consider the classical expression of the energy of an electron, relativistic electron of mass m and momentum p, in the field of a charge Ze. So this is the energy, classical energy. And now, in order to estimate the ground state energy, I say that the electron position cannot be determined to better than h bar over p, quantum mechanics. And therefore, the energy will be larger than this combination, where here I replaced 1 over r by h over p, h bar over p. And now, this is why I have said that if you minimize with respect to p this expression, you get the ground state, and this is the expression that you get. And in fact, this expression happens to be the exact ground state of the relativistic hydrogen atom with charge Z. And even in the non-relativistic part, it's exact. Okay? But it's just a coincidence. Okay? So this is the ground state energy. And now you notice that if Z alpha is larger than 1, then this ground state becomes imaginary. And this is the instability. Okay? So we have this instability, but in order to observe it, we need that Z alpha should be larger than 1, which means Z has to be larger than 137. And there are no such stable nuclei that have been created, so therefore it's just an academic problem. But suppose now that you consider an analogous condensed matter system with a much larger effective fine structure constant. And proposal is to consider graphene. In graphene, which we'll elaborate a little bit on it later, the excitations are massless Dirac excitations with a Fermi velocity that is 2 orders of magnitude smaller than the velocity of light, so that the effective fine structure constant in graphene is the one that we have usually, except that here we replace C by Vf, this Vf, which means that this fine structure constant is now of the order of unity. And therefore, this instability that we have here is, occurs when Z is of the order of unity, which means that you can observe this instability with Dirac Coulomb potential with just a charge of the order 1. Okay? So this problem is less academic. And so this is the idea to now to put charge impurities in graphene. So this instability of the Dirac plus Coulomb potential, 1 over R, is exactly an equivalent example of this breaking of continuous scale invariance into discrete scale invariance. All what I said for the 1 over R squared is absolutely, goes over to this case. And the question is there an Efimov-like spectrum for the massless Dirac problem? And the answer is yes. And this is easy to obtain it using this renormalization group picture that I described before. And so this is the picture that we had before for the 1 over R squared potential, where the transition between this single bound state to a universal Efimov spectrum. And for the graphene Dirac quantum phase transition, the dimensionless coupling now is this coupling. It's Z times this effective alpha. The singular value is now equal to d minus 1 over 2, which for graphene, which is 2-dimensional, is 2 minus 1 over 2 is 1/2. And then we expect a transition between a single bound state here to a universal Efimov spectrum for the Dirac massless Coulomb potential problem. You are still with me? Yes? Okay, good. So now experiments. I promised you experiments, here are experiments. So those are experiments that have been done in a group of Evan Drey and Varghese. So they consider graphene films. So graphene is a real 2-dimensional system. I will not give you a colloquium on graphene because I'm unable to do this. And what they did was the following. They just bombarded this graphene with helium ions. And then they created vacancies in the graphene, just holes, okay? Because as a result of those sputtering by helium ions. And then with an STM, scanning tunneling microscope, they could inject local charges by just applying voltage pulses on this STM. So you apply voltage pulse, and each time that you do it, you just put in a given charge in this graphene, in this vacancy that was created. Here were the vacancies. There are vacancies. This is the graphene before. After this sputtering by ions, there are vacancies somewhere. And here with your STM, you just inject local charges. And you use the same STM in order to measure the local density of spectrum. And this is what you obtain. This is a measurement. Now, for beta smaller than beta critical, which is 1/2, you see, so this is with the, you measure locally the spectrum with this STM. So the STM measures, in fact, the tunneling conductance.
How beta is changed? How beta is controlled?
By what I said, with this STM, each time that you apply a voltage pulse, you put an additional charge. And you increase beta like this. Okay? So you do not know what exactly this is the charge. You cannot just add them one by one, but there is a charge. And you change beta like this. Okay? And when beta is smaller than 1/2, this critical value, then you see that you have one state that so it is, in fact, it's a quasi-bound state because there are massless excitations. It's a quasi-bound state. And when you change beta, the position of this state just moves at different energies. So this is the same as this state. Okay? And it just moves and it gets broader and broader when you increase beta. Okay? But you have always one state, only one state. So which is this scenario. And when beta becomes larger than beta critical, then you see that you have several states, which is this Efimov spectrum. So this is the transition.
Also local period?
Wait. So now the question of Yoav is this just wishful thinking that it obeys this, or it is really like that? Right? Is it really Efimov spectrum that we see? So those are more data that have been compiled and obtained by Jin Hai and Omri. And each time, so here I just indicate some of those peaks. So sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's less obvious. So here there is one peak, here there is one peak. So you see that. And those are different values of beta. Always overcritical, over 1/2. Okay? And now you put all those data on our Efimov spectrum. This is what we obtain. Those lines are this relation, this equation, this universal Efimov spectrum, and the points are all the data that I showed to you before. So this is the moment that I expect the people to say, wow, not bad. Okay, this is good, very good. So you have to train me. Now I should add that the error bars is about the size of the points. Oh, have you seen? You should learn from Mike.
Excuse me, Eric. What is the width of the line?
What is what?
On what does the width of the line depend?
Width of the line. Which line? This line?
No, if you go one slide, yeah.
This?
Yes.
It depends on beta. On the charge, on beta. And it depends on many things, because, okay, yeah. It depends on beta and on other things that I don't know. But now let me just say something about this, is that here you should say, wow, it's very, very, very nice. But you should be surprised, because in fact, the observation of this universal spectrum and of the quantum phase transition between a single state and this Efimov state is absolutely not obvious, okay? Because those quasi-bound states that we have measured, that they have measured, are the response of delocalized conduction electrons in graphene to a local charge. This experiment is not at all Dirac hydrogen atom. It's something much more complicated. And to tell you the truth, about a year ago, I gave this talk with before the experiments were done, the idea to some specialists of graphene, but they were afraid of it. And they said, okay, look, you are very nice, we love you very much, but all this is just academic picture, because it will never occur in graphene. Graphene is very complicated, very complicated. You will never see that. And they were right. There are a lot of reasons, not only the one that Joshua told us, but many reasons why it should not work. But it works. So for me, there are more questions than answers. I'm completely surprised that it works so well, because really it works well. But in case you think that it should work like this, I have another surprise for you. So I have...
Maybe the focus of the plot is other fitting parameters or...
No fitting parameters. No, but. Eric, just Eric.
How the experiment is actually done? I mean, the STM sits in one place over this charge position.
Yes.
And if you scan a little bit in the neighborhood, what do you see? I mean, it's an external object.
What is an external object? STM?
No,
of course, yeah. That's the point. That those quasi-bound states are response of electrons which are completely delocalized. I agree with you. But what you measure...
If they move a little bit from this point, what do you see?
If there is no charge, then you will see nothing. You have to be where is the charge. So you have to, your STM put a charge and measures the local density of states. Where is the charge? If you move to a place where there is no charge, you move here, then you will see nothing.
No, but that's very far. But if you move a little bit around it, do you...
I'm theoretician here.
It's very close to the lowest spectral here.
בוא נעצור את הדיון. יש לנו זמן לשאלות. יש ההפתעה בפנינו.
No, there is only one source, but an interesting, nice one. So, all this is, again, you know, I'm surprised the way you are. So, I mean, I have many more questions that you could ask, even, you know. But I have another surprise, as I said. The surprise is the following: that so far I gave this name Efimov, but I didn't explain what is Efimov physics. I didn't say a word about it. So now I want to tell you what is Efimov physics. Efimov physics is in fact the following. It's a field that is called Efimov physics today, which is the search for universality in cold atomic gases. And more precisely, it's the search of discrete scale invariance, now we know what it is, in the non-relativistic quantum three-body problem. This has absolutely nothing to do with all what I said so far. Nothing. So what Efimov did in almost half a century ago in his PhD thesis in the Soviet Union, he analyzed the three-nucleon system interacting through a very short-range potential. R0 is the range. And he pointed out that there exists a universal part of the spectrum, universal physics, he called it, at low energies, energies which are smaller than h bar squared divided by n. N is the mass of the nucleon, they are all the same mass, R0, which is the range of this potential. So it's completely different physics. Now you can reset completely all what I said before. This is another problem, okay? And then, what he showed is that when the scattering lengths, so you have three identical bosons of same mass, identical. And 2 by 2, they have a given scattering length between them, you call it A. This is the scattering length of the two-body interaction. When this scattering length becomes larger than this short-range interaction, then there is a sequence of three-body bound states of the three-body problem, okay, whose binding energies is space geometrically, this is what the way he called it, in the interval between those two energies. In short, this is what he did, what he found. He found that when A increases, the scattering length, there are bound states that appear according to this relation, where S0 is just a number, it's a universal number. It's the solution of a geometric equation. Okay, it's not, so you have to, it's a very complicated problem. So now you can ask me how you get this number, and I will tell you it's a very complicated problem, the number of times that you will ask me. because I even don't know how to reproduce this calculation. It's really very complicated. But at the end of the day, you get this spectrum, but for a very, very short portion of this three-body quantum problem. Just in the small portion, you get this spectrum, and this is called the Efimov spectrum. Okay? And with this number. And what he found is that it's possible to reduce this three-body quantum problem to an effective Schrödinger equation with this potential. And now this potential is 1 over r squared. But again, this is a very, very long way to move from this three-body problem to this effective Schrödinger equation. So I cannot explain this way, but this is what he did. And this potential, this is the potential, and this is the zeta that he found, whereas 0 is just this universal number. This, exactly. Okay, you can calculate it. It's a solution of a given geometric equation. So, this Efimov physics is always supercritical. Why? Because this is the potential, it's a 1 over r squared potential, with this value of S0. But we know that in 3 dimensions, the critical zeta for Schrödinger equation is given by this. So it's equal to 1/4. Okay? And Efimov physics occurs at a given fixed value of zeta. You cannot change it, it's given. And this value is S0 squared plus a fourth, which is equal to this squared plus 1 over 4, which is this number. And this number is larger than 1/4. So Efimov physics is fixed, you cannot change zeta, but it is always supercritical in the Efimov spectrum part. Okay? So now, this was done in the 70s. In fact, so there are a lot of stories about Efimov. So first of all, people did not believe it, tried to rule it out, to show that he made a mistake and all this. And it's only in 2006 that in the field of cold atoms, not nucleons, but cold atoms, that this Efimov spectrum was measured for the first time. Beautiful journal, that is our dream, each of us, Nature. And Rudi Green, in his group in Austria, measured the Efimov state n equals to 1, which means that this is his picture. So this is the picture that I presented to you before. So he measured only this state, this one, only 1, n equals 1. Okay? This was Nature, 2006. And here there is this non-Efimov trimmer, which is this non-universal part, and all that. Now, 8 years later, in 2014, the same group published also in a very honorable journal, Physical Regulators, that got selected viewpoints, a measurement of n equals 2, which means the second state here. It took 8 years to measure the second state. And you have really, they are beautiful experiments, very non-trivial experiments. But just to measure those 2 points. So now, universality. If all what I said about universality is correct, this means that in our graphene Efimov spectrum, zeta that corresponds to Efimov physics, which is 1.26, etc., sits here, 1.26 here. Okay? Now, if the spectrum is universal, then I can take those experimental values obtained in ultra-cold atoms and put them on this spectrum. And this is what we did. So here are the 2 experimental points obtained for the cesium atom, n equals 1 and equals 2. No adjustable parameter. I just put them on this graphene spectrum.
Wow.
And this is not obvious at all. This is really universality. Because here, I put on the same curve the quasi-bound state excitations of massless Dirac excitations in graphene and the 3-body bound states of Efimov obtained in cesium, in cold atomic cesium. And you see that it sits absolutely perfectly on the same curve. This is really the nice point. Okay? So 2 very different physical phenomena share the same universal spectrum. Okay? So this is finished. I have to go back. So to summarize, I gave you two examples of breaking of continuous scale invariance into discrete scale invariance. We observed this quantum phase transition on graphene, and it raises more questions than it solved. Efimov physics belongs to this universality class, but it does not allow to observe this transition because Efimov physics is at a fixed zeta. You cannot move, you cannot change the charge of the zeta. It's 1.00, etc. This breaking of continuous scale invariance using the renormalization group picture, in fact, is not mine. It has been proposed in a paper of Ken Wilson in 1971 in order to explain strong interactions. It's a huge paper, but it's a beautiful one. So this picture comes from this paper. Okay. So just in case that if you have questions, you ask him. Okay. Now, to open this problem to other problems, this results to other problems. In fact, other problems can be described similarly as what is called conformality lost. This is to phrase a paper by Kaplan et al. From 2009, and emergence of liquid limit cycles. One problem belongs to this universality class. It's the Kosterlitz-Towers transition. So you can just look at this Lagrangian if you want and see that in fact the Kosterlitz-Towers transition can be explained with this 1/r² potential. Another problem is the line repeating transition, problem that has been investigated a long time ago by Michael Fisher and Rainer Klipowski. Also the roughening and wetting transition. It's an old paper by Brezin, Perrin, and Steinleibler. So all those problems belong to some extent to the same universality class, which means that you can put the points there on the same graph as these massless Dirac excitations in graphene. There is another example, but I don't know anything about this. This is just to please our friends from the 7th floor, which is this Breitenloher Friedman bound for free massive scalar fields on this ADS D+1 space. But this is more that to ask them to explain to me why it belongs to this, and just opposite. So thank you very much for that.